Hello and welcome to the Phu Cat Stories podcast. I'm your moderator, Saigon Steve. On this recorded podcast, we'll talk with service alumni who were stationed at Phu Cat Air Force Base in Vietnam and talk with them about their experiences. Today's podcast is pre-recorded, but you're invited to participate on future podcasts by emailing your contact information to phukatstories@gmail.com. That's phukatstories@gmail.com. So let's get started with today's Phu Cat guest. We're talking with Bob Klein, who was at Phu Cat Air Force Base in Vietnam, and he now lives in Denver, Colorado. Hi, Bob.
How are you this morning?
Pretty good. People who are on the Phu Cat alumni Facebook page may recognize the name Bob Klein. Bob is the chap that's been selling the Phu Cat hats on the Phu Cat alumni page. Tell me about the hats before we begin with your tour in Vietnam.
Started off as I wanted to buy a hat, and I had a friend that I made in basic training, and we followed each other all the way over to Phu Cat. And I found a hat online, and I ordered it, paid for it, but I could not get them to return my phone call to give me a delivery date. This went on for 3 months. Then I found out they went out of business. But I had the picture of the artwork, and I thought, I'm going to start shopping around because I wanted a hat, and I couldn't find one. And I found a company that I could send the artwork to, and then they gave me a price. And there were some of the fine details on there that just kicked the price up to where it wasn't even anything I'd even want to try to do. So it got changed somewhat. So I had to order 36 hats to begin with, which I knew I could use 2 of them, and I had no idea what was going to happen with the rest of them. But I went ahead and ordered them. I got them in here, put a picture of the hats, and told them I had them, on the alumni page. And I'll be darned, here start coming checks, and said, I'll take one. I just figured it up this morning. I've got one I'm packaging up now. I've sold 195 hats. And I'll be darned, I am just passing the cost of the hats, the shipping, the boxes, the tape along. So a $21 hat is exactly what it cost, $21. I did not make a dime off of it. I'm not wanting to make money off of it. I'm doing this for labor of love. Some of the notes you get back, I've got one here that I just got, and that's unpackaged. And he said, hi, Bob. I was there when you were. I think we were in the same barracks. I was the guy with the loud Pioneer speakers. Notes like that come in and say, oh, my gosh. It's just, like I say again, it's a labor of love. And I think I've got, this last order right before the pandemic, I ordered a few extras thinking it's got to end somewhere. And I think I've got 24 left. And the people at the post office said, I thought you were done with it. And I said, I did too, but I just keep getting people to want them, and you do your best to fulfill their wishes. So that's how I got started. Nothing to make money, just wanted a hat.
Well, your legacy is going to be the Phu Cat Hat Man.
I'll take it.
So, Bob Klein, let's start from the beginning. When did you join the Air Force?
I actually went in on a deferred enlistment in March of '67. Ended up going to Lackland Air Force Base for basic training, and then I went to Amarillo for tech school, and I was an aircraft mechanic. And then after Amarillo, I went to Luke Air Force Base. And from there, I went to Vietnam and came back and went to Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. So I stayed in the desert Southwest, and living in Denver. That last duty station after I got back from Vietnam it was probably a 7.5, 8 hour drive. I came home 13 weekends in a row because I met a lady. She said, let's get married. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's get married. I'm wearing out a car driving back up and forth to see you every weekend.
So when you
and
said,
that's about the sum total of,
well, you've encapsulated a whole Air Force career in about 1 minute here. We have to continue though. So when you say you were trained in your AFSC as an engine mechanic for aircraft, I assume that was jet engines, right?
No, it was a complete aircraft. I was a crew chief, was what I was being trained for.
Okay, what is the job of a crew chief?
Getting the plane prepped up and ready to go, refueled, make sure everything's prepped up and checking the brakes, changing tires, and checking hydraulic leaks, giving it a good checking over. It's like driving into a service station. The guy comes out and checks your oil and your antifreeze and your windshield wiper fluid. Same thing, just kind of glorified. That's what I was trained to do.
So you went to tech school, trained to be a crew chief. How long was the tech school? How many weeks was that?
It was about 90 days, right in that area, about 3 months. And then it was, they gave you the basics. And then once you got down to Luke Air Force Base, it was on the flight line and working on the plane. So it was hands-on stuff. And you'd be working with the senior airman that had been on the job for a while or had come back from Vietnam.
But when you signed up for the Air Force, did they tell you that the slot we had open for you was crew chief for aircraft? Or did they say, we're going to find a slot for you somewhere, and you ended up being crew chief? How did that work out?
I asked to be an aircraft mechanic, and that's what I got, which is interesting.
So when you say a mechanic, you're, like you said, you are dealing with every aspect of the aircraft from the nose to the tail, correct?
That's correct. If it was a technical problem with it, you would call avionics, you'd call hydraulics, you'd call engine shop or whatever, but it was your job to find out if there were any problems with it, and if they were small enough, you could, if you had popped rivets on a wing or if you had broken safety wire, you repair that. It's kind of an interesting, you see the guy that's loading the pilot up in there and strapping him in and climbing down the ladder, and giving him the thumbs up as he taxis out. That's the crew chief doing that.
So I guess you walk out there before with a clipboard and a checklist, and you go up and down the checklist to see if everything is A-OK?
Yes. Yep. Make sure they haven't got any flat spots on their tires from coming in hot and slamming on the brakes, and, they haven't got any hydraulic leaks around any seals on the landing gears. It's, a lot of visual inspection of it to make sure that it was flight worthy.
So what kind of aircraft were they that you were working on?
F-100s. Lead sled, they called them.
Why did they call it the lead sled?
Oh, God, it was a heavy damn plane. It was just the maneuverability of it compared to an F-4 was, it was just a sled. They really had to work at it to get it to fly decent.
Yeah, our wing out at Andrews Air Force Base was the F-100s. And, the F-100s out at Andrews, and we were in the D.C. District of Columbia Air National Guard. We had one of our guardsmen, one of the pilots, fly the F-100. I'm not sure if this is a true story, but they said he flew underneath the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. The cars going across it, and he flew under the bridge. And I think they took away his plane and his commission and everything. But he had fun.
Yeah, for a little bit. My gosh. Yeah, those pilots all had a little bit of an attitude anyhow. They were, I don't know, they thought they could walk on water. I guess that's what kept them in the flight game, to think they were bulletproof.
So, Bob Klein, what year did you go to Phu Cat?
I went in June of 68 and came home in May of 69.
I ask everyone the same question. What was your impression when you got off the airplane? What ran through your mind?
I hate to even cuss like this, but God damn, it's hot over here and humid. After being in Luke Air Force Base where it was hot, but it wasn't humid, and then you put them both together, and holy smoke, next thing I know, my shirt's sopping wet. it was pretty brutal as far as the heat and the humidity coming up. And I thought, well, I guess we'll get through this one way or the other.
So you had the same responsibilities at Phu Cat that you did back in the States, that you checked out the plane?
No,
No? What was that about?
no. I flew into Cameron Bay and jumped on a C-130, and after hours of looking for a plane to get up to Phu Cat, and we flew into there, and a bunch of us unloaded, and he kind of got you lined up, and he said, okay, he pointed at me and said, you come with me. And he said, you're going to be in Transit Alert, which is basically, they had trucks called follow me trucks. And so they'd have transit airplanes come in, and you'd direct them into a parking spot that was designated for them at that time. That was one of the jobs. And the other one, after a while, I became a crash recovery person, picking up airplanes off the runway with a 50-ton crane. It had tires that were probably 8 foot tall, and it was hydraulically steered. Basically, you didn't have any linkage like a car. And then the other one that came along with being in that area, transit planes would come in, and you would load their bladders with Agent Orange.
So you were exposed to Agent Orange on the flight line?
Oh, my gosh. Yes. And I think about it every day because I have to deal with it every day of the rest of my life. I developed some problems with my colon when I got back, and checking in, and I'd registered for Agent Orange exposure. I don't know whether you know it or not, but that base got sprayed 6 times, and they told it was mosquito repellent, or killing mosquitoes. Well, actually, it was operation called Ranch Hand, where they loaded the Agent Orange in the planes and flew around and cleared the vegetation around. I ingested some of it because there was no protective equipment. The only thing I had was a pair of glasses, and it was like going to a gas station. You'd pump the Agent Orange into this open, you'd have a cap on a bladder that you'd pump it into, and it was clear. You could watch it fill up. And I've got some burns on my arm still, but it ingested into me, and I got it in my colon. It ended up down there. And about 7 years ago, the colon finally gave it up and had to have it removed. And I remember the surgeon coming in, and he said, my God, he said, this is the worst colon I've ever taken out of a living human being. He said, it's black. He said, what happened to you? And I explained to him, he said, I've never run across that before. So, I think about Vietnam every damn day because I'm missing a colon because of Agent Orange.
And when we were at Phu Cat, we were young, and we had our whole lives ahead of us, and we weren't afraid of chemicals being put into an airplane. And never did we think that this was something that was going to come back and bite us later on.
Yeah, they had, nobody knew what it was, or if they did, they didn't tell you. Hey, just go out and fill that plane up with that stuff out of the barrels, Well, some of them had orange stripes, white stripes. You'd say, give them 2 of these and 1 of those, fill that bladder up. Okay, all right, no big deal. You never thought anything about it. You just, when you're young and it's like that, they tell you to do something, you do it so you don't get, a dishonorable discharge. I tell you what, though, getting off that kind of a downer story, going back to that 50-ton crane, Red Horse was building revetments at that time, and they were pouring concrete, and they had this machine that they would bring concrete in, very, very similar to the ones that they're using on highways when they're just pouring concrete into this thing, going back and forth and smoothing it out, and the concrete's finished, as it goes along. So Red Horse, a captain came over, and he said, you're checked out on that machine? I said, yeah. He said, I need you to come over here, pick up this paving machine, and move it over to the next revetment for me. Okay, well, I guess it's all right. You talk to my, the guy in charge. Oh, yeah, don't worry about that. All right. So I could get up in this big Bertha, and it's massive. It's 50-ton crane on 4 wheels, and it's like a big alligator. It's got a tail out there and a tail hook. So I'm going down between where the planes are parking these revetments, working my way down there. And there's supposed to be somebody watching for me, but with this diesel running in the engine, you couldn't hear anybody. And I came around the corner and made the corner. I was watching the front so I didn't run into one of the airplanes. Came around the corner, and there was a guard shack right by the tail end with a guard in it. And you've probably heard the story of somebody knocking over a guard shack with the guard in it.
No, I haven't heard that.
That was me. And I thought, I'm going to jail. And this captain said, he screamed at me, he said, keep going. He said, don't worry about that guard shack. Don't worry about it. Keep going. Okay. So I went down and picked up the machine, moved it around, put it right where they wanted it, and came back. And they had a couple of guys watching a little closer this time. The guard shack was back up and back. That was Red Horse. I mean, it was like, it never happened, never heard anything out of there. It petrified me at the time, but never heard another word about it.
But there wasn't a guard in the shack when you knocked it over, right?
Yes, there was. I'd love to talk to him, but I don't know who it was. Guard in there, and he went running out there with his gun, with his rifle.
You'll remember that day also.
Oh yeah, he'll remember it. I don't know who it is. It was one of those deals where you thought, I'm going to prison. Something's going to happen, or get demoted or something. But it was never mentioned again, and the guard shack was back up after I got done, which was amazing to me. That Red Horse, I don't know whether they had a forklift, they had another one, they brought it in, set it down, and they were done. By the time I was done, there was another shack sitting there that had never been touched. Wow, what a day.
So it's interesting. You were trained as a crew chief, and yet you seem to be on vehicles with four wheels. You probably should have been in the transportation squadron where I was.
Yeah, I tell you the truth, I didn't know where I was at half the time because they had you doing so much stuff. Were you in crash recovery with the fire department? Were you in bringing in airplanes in a truck? Or were you doing a runway check? It was such a variety. It wasn't so humdrum every day that you went and did the same thing and had any boring days. It was great.
So, Bob, you spent most of your time on the flight line. Is that correct?
Yeah, or in the time up there with the transit planes coming in near the tower. Because you'd take these follow-me trucks and in the mornings or whatever time your shift started, they'd want you to do a runway check just to make sure there weren't any snakes or any bombs, or make sure there wasn't any damage on it, anything falling off a plane. And so you'd get on the runway and you'd, 25 miles an hour for maybe 3 feet, and then speed would go up. By the time you got to the other end, you're doing as fast as the truck could go. And, a kind of a fun time to be out there checking the runway. It made it a little exciting. Sometimes you'd line up two trucks side by side and drag race down there. And we had a staff sergeant that he thought he was a real good person that could shift the gears on the column, and we were racing down there, and the gear shift went through the windshield. He broke it off at the collar right at the steering column, and I think he ended up talking to somebody in the motor pool, and they mail ordered a conversion kit to go on the floor. So that truck would always want to be taken out because he could really shift it fast.
So you remember basically being on the flight line in those vehicles, and it's got to be hot out there on the flight line. It's all being reflected off the runway and everything, right?
Oh yeah. I liked the night shift a lot better because it was a lot cooler. Where you would, I remember in the daytime taking a shower, and you'd take a towel to dry off. You'd say, okay, I'm pretty dry. And by the one time you went to put your clothes on, you were as wet as you were when you got out of the shower.
So, Bob, you were there basically the same time I was there. If you remember the sapper attacks on the base, were you involved in those at all?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, I remember them, the siren going off and people hollering, let's run to the bunker. And that was shortly after I got there, I think. And you'd run out there. We went to the bunker once, and they had all kinds of noises going on outside. And I thought, I hope these guys that are on the perimeter know what they're doing, because I sure don't. You have a flak jacket and a helmet and nothing else, no firearms or nothing. We checked out on them. But I went in the Air Force thinking, if I was an aircraft mechanic, they're going to protect that multi-million-dollar airplane. So if I can kind of skirt my way along with it, being close to it, maybe I can come home and be, unscathed. That's what my thoughts were, going in the Air Force rather than going in the Navy or the Marines or the Army. And I don't know. I think I was pretty darn lucky to get the duty I had. I was pretty pleased.
Well, when you said multi-million-dollar airplane, they put the revetments over the airplanes. They did not put the revetments over the barracks.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Hopefully they were shooting at the airplanes and not us. That's what I most of the time they were shooting at them.
Well, it shows you where we were on the chain of importance.
Yeah. Yeah, we were down at the expendable portion of it that they haven't got a whole lot invested in.
We had a tin roof, and they had revetments.
That is right. That is exactly right.
So while you were at Phu Cat, did you ever go down to Quy Nhon? And if you did, can you tell us anything about that?
Oh my. I went down there once and got a ride. I got the flak jacket and the helmet, and they were taking a deuce and a half. I think it was the Army driving down there. And, I heard them say, don't stop for anything on the way down. Okay. I guess it was, getting a little dangerous. And so we're in the back of the truck, and pretty soon we heard this loud bang. This was like somebody jarred the front of the truck. And it was a deuce and a half, 2.5-ton truck, 6-wheel drive. It had hit a water buffalo on a water paddy dike, knocked it into the rice paddy, and he kept on driving. He wouldn't stop for anything. And we looked back, and the buffalo was dead. He's got his head buried in the water. We went down to Quy Nhon and messed around for a while, looking around town, and just went to the BX and looking for something to do. And then we got back on the truck to come back. Time we hit that spot where that buffalo was at, there was nothing but a little trace of blood that was laying there. They had butchered it and got it out of there, and it probably had it cooking already. That's the one thing I remember about going to Quy Nhon, and I said, I don't think I'm going back down there again.
That buffalo went to the roadkill buffet.
Yes, it did. It did go to it. It didn't take long to butcher that thing either. It was gone. The hide, the head, the hoofs, everything. It was completely gone. I don't know. Must have had a whole village out there butchering the thing. That was pretty shocking to me to hear that thing jar the front of the truck. I thought we ran over a landmine, and it knocked you forward. What the heck was that? Those water buffalo were pretty good size. They're almost. No, I think they're a little bit bigger than the American buffalo.
Well, when you talk about your trip down to Quy Nhon on a deuce and a half, that was one of my duties, was to drive down to Quy Nhon, and I either rode shotgun or was a driver. And, of course, the first time you go off base, and I'd only been at Phu Cat maybe 3 weeks, and they assigned me to go off base, which I was not happy about, but you follow orders. So the first time you go off base, you're wearing a helmet and a flak jacket. You got a round in your M16. Second time you go off base, a week later, it's a little high. I won't wear the flak jacket, but I'll keep the helmet on. Third time you go off, you don't have the helmet or the flak jacket. So your attitude changes. But the first time off the base, you think there's a Viet Cong behind every tree.
Oh, that's true. That is true. They used to bring Army helicopters in there, those little 2-seaters with the observation bubble in the front on C-141s to unload them, and then they do a final assembly there after they were shipped. And the Army would come in and do a little test flight on them. So I get to talking to this Army pilot, and I don't know, he was probably working on maybe the last one to go up and make sure everything was functioning. He said, "Hey, you want to go for a ride?" "Yeah, sure." Got on the plane or the helicopter and took off, and everything's fine. And he's kind of strafing this river just to see what it'll do. And so he made a dip down and then went straight up in the air, just pulling as hard as it could. Well, I didn't know, but it had a clutch in the rotor that had so much tension on it that the clutch popped loose, and then it freewheeled for a while, and then it re-engaged. And he did that, and I thought, I'm going to die in this thing. And he just laughed himself to death, and ended up getting me back there. And I said, I'll never get in another helicopter again after that. I had to go change my clothes. It was probably one of the scariest things I've ever done. I did go back to Vietnam, as a matter of fact.
Oh, tell us about that.
I didn't actually go straight to Vietnam. I did a Southeast Asia cruise, which started in Singapore, went to Bangkok, and then went to a town in a port in Cambodia. Lam Shabang is as near as I can pronounce it, which was, it was a shipping port that poor country is beat up. And then we made a couple other stops. We stopped in Saigon and went up some of the canals and ended up going to Coochie Tunnels, which was, everything is underground. And they said, why don't you crawl in there? And Jesus Christ, I'm not a small man, but I got in there about 10 feet, and I said, I got to get out of here. I got claustrophobic, which I don't do, and backed out. And you could see the pock marks, the craters from where the B-52s had dropped bombs in there that were still in the ground, and the tunnels underneath were still intact, which was unbelievable. And that was a stop in Saigon. And then we went up the coast and went into Hang Long Bay into Hanoi. And one of the excursions was into Hanoi. You spent the night in Hanoi, and then you went to the Hanoi Hilton. Well, there was a guy that was speaking on the ship that was a guest speaker, and his name was Edward Martin. He was a vice admiral in the Navy and was shot down, I believe, in July of '67. Had both shoulders broke through rope torture, and then he was chained up, putting leg irons on and arm irons for, I don't know how many months he said, but he was there just short of 6 years. And he was speaking on the cruise ship. So he happened to be right across the aisle from me on the bus as we went in there. And so I talked to him, and, we made friends. And so the next day when we went to the Hanoi Hilton, I just happened to be walking right beside him. And I have a picture of him in front of the Hanoi Hilton. And that was his home for almost 6 years. We went inside to take in a briefing room, and, some young kid starts telling you the history of the thing. And he said, I need to stop you right there. He said, I was here. And he said, this is what happened. And that poor kid's eyes they got real big because there wasn't any propaganda still being spewed about it. He was there when McCain was, and McCain's flight suit's still hanging on the wall in there, along with a picture of Hanoi Jane on the anti-aircraft gun in North Korea. After we left that room, we went out in the courtyard. He was going to show us where the cells were at. Well, Admiral Martin was walking beside me, and I could see him kind of getting wobbly. Well, I put my arm around him and, got a hold of him, and we got up close to the cell that was on display, and he said, that was my cell for 6 years. And his wife and my wife just kind of walked away. I stood with him for probably, seemed like forever, but probably 20 minutes, not a word said. And finally he made a move like he wanted to leave. But it's an eerie place. Think about going back after 6 years, going in that place, and some place where you've been tortured and both of your shoulders broken. You're laying on a cot, not able to even feed yourself because you couldn't move your arms. It was a hell of a return for him. And then he just died, I don't know, I'm trying to think how long ago it was. He fell at home, hit his head, and he never recovered. I guess he maybe got an aneurysm or something and passed away. And I think that's probably been 3 or 4 years ago. But what a nice man. You just, to me, that was one of my times that I'll never forget. I've got a book that I bought at the prison that he signed inside, and I do have a picture of him with myself. It's I don't know, something I'll go to my grave remember to this day, or that day, and the rest of my life.
What an incredible story, and to be there with the man that was in prison there for 6 years. Wow.
Yeah.
So is there anything light you want to end on that we can end on, Bob? Anything funny that we can end on so that people have a smile on their face when they finish this podcast, now that we are all back in the war?
Wow. Yeah, I got something happy for you. I got a lot of hats yet to sell, so send your money in and let's get them back to you. Then you can walk around and hopefully someday I'll see you with your hat on, and I'll say, I sold you that hat. That would be wonderful. I'm still in shock that I've sent out 195 of them, which is it's so rewarding. It's great.
I love the hat, and I think I told you before we went on the podcast. I put the hat over top of my military ego wall, where you have the triangular showcase, where you have your medals and your nameplate and the patch from Phu Cat and your stripes. Yep. And on and on and on. And where it comes to the top of the triangle, or the pyramid of the display case on the wall, that's where I placed your hat. So you have top priority up there.
I remember seeing that picture. You posted that. Yes, I do. Yes. It's surprising that the comments you get back from people when they get them. There was a lady that her husband was in, I believe it was in the New Jersey National Guard, and he died. And she sent me a letter, and she said that she would like to have a hat for her, basically a memorial for her husband, that she was going to put with the rest of his stuff. And so I sent her a hat. I just sent it to her. And said, and actually I put her check back in and sent it to her. And she sent me a text message and said, I can't open it. She said, I'm just afraid I'm going to start crying. I'm getting teared up thinking about it. And finally, one of her kids came over and she opened it up about 4 days later. And she said it's on top of her mantle with his picture and his medal.
You have a legacy of being the Phu Cat Hat Man, and you've done a great service to the people that were at Phu Cat. Well, Bob Klein, it was great speaking with you. I'm glad we had the time together, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for interviewing me, and you brought up memories that I hadn't had in a long time, and I sure appreciate you doing this. It means a lot.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Phu Cat Stories. If you'd like to participate in a future Phu Cat Stories podcast, email your contact information to phukatstories@gmail.com. That's phukatstories@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Phu Cat Stories podcast. I'm Saigon Steve.